is here. And so no telling how many people may show up to hear what he has to say. I know I would. Uh, I met Troy many, many years ago I think we were in Birmingham, and he was doing some forecasting work for a project I was working on with the Treasury. And my biggest memory was trying to get him. My wife and I are like, "Hey, we'll give you a ride to the airport," but I evidently typed in the airport address, and we headed to not where the commercial flights were. And if I remember right, we got him in. He was able to get on the flight on time, but not in spite of my incompetence at getting to the correct airport. But we did get in there. But it was an exciting few minutes trying to figure out why the airport did not look like what we were expecting it to be. But Troy's going to be talking to us about how prioritization looks different with when you're using AI. And he and I chatted a little bit yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to this. Enough so that I don't want to take up any more of his time, so we can hear everything. So Troy, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much for coming. Really excited to see what you got to say.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hardly even remember that. Yeah, I mean, you really don't know whether you know, whether the airport should be in a little sort of aircraft hangar. I mean, it felt right, and away we go. But anyway, the main thing was you gave me a lift to the airport. So thanks, Mark. So I'm Troy. What will be written on my tombstone is he was good at spreadsheets. That's all I'm really sort of known for is sort of spreadsheets and sort of data. Um, Now my career started pre-Agile, if you can believe there was a period before Agile, right? And I've sort of grown up through all of the need, if you were paying out of your pocket for bits of software that took 3 years to develop, you would sort of want it to be pretty nailed down and know what you're spending your money on. So, back in the late 80s, early 90s, that was exactly sort of what we did. And we used to specifically write down everything we wanted. And only once we got that right would we actually then move on to developing it. And then only once we got it finished developed, we would remove the developers and hire the testers and then test it. And that was sort of all around this desperately seeking certainty paradigm. I keep sort of teaching is that the bigger something is, the longer it takes to do, the more you want to focus on the predictability of it because the amount of cash you have to spend grows. And when Agile came along, it was all about being able to do smaller chunks. And that's just imagine. I mean, if you were going to develop something and it was going to take sort of 2 years, you should expect there's going to be a lot of change through that 2 years as you do stuff. But if your customers only see it at the end of 2 years, you lack any feedback from those customers to define the product that you're trying to build in the first place. So then you still find out all that year you spent thinking about it was just a small subset of people who sort of had a specific need in mind that wasn't the customer's need at all. So Agile was about solving particularly that problem. There was a little bit of, if you ever read the Agile Manifesto, there was a bit of a plea, please, please don't change your mind too often. But there was also another side of it that sort of said, please change your mind because we need to adapt as we move along. And what I'm finding in this new AI generated code sort of world is that we can code a lot faster, which means we can make the wrong thing much faster, which means we can get that feedback far sooner should we be asking and listening for it. So whereas the constraint used to be on the number of developers we could have to do and what they were going to get done, and in typing and researching and going out to Stack Overflow every time you got stuck. There's been a generation shift there too, right? Because when we started coding in the 90s, the internet wasn't invented yet, right? So we had books on our shelf. So when we got stuck, we'd have to go to our shelf, and likely we didn't have the book on the latest technology, so we'd have to run down to a bookstore. You will have to sort of Google what they look like because they're rare nowadays, right? So there was a whole set of publishing of Rocks Press and A Press and stuff like that, which had coding books which were relevant for that period of time, almost like law firms. We always needed the latest books to be able to code. And then one day what happened, Yeah, one day what happened is the internet came along, and then we could sort of have online resources, which helped. But part of the process was one day there was a internet outage, and I went to code, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. So I become completely reliant on the internet to be able to code. And now I find AI is a similar aspect of it. Every time OpenAI or have an outage, I'm stuck. I can't code anymore. So I don't know what comes next. Yeah, we used to have dial-up bulletin boards. I'm glad someone uh, knows our pain. So anyway, so the problem was always around being able to get information and write the code. But with AI in the engineering tools, that changes a little. And I think the constraints change a little. What happens is we sort of now, if we if we have unclear work, if we don't know what you're really talking about, then it's pretty hard for even the AI to give you the result you wanted. And as we can code almost anything, which was my first instinct, I wrote an article about 6 months ago where I said, this is fantastic. We can go right through our backlog and throw the whole lot of it at an agent and come back in the morning and have an empty backlog of all of the defects that never got prioritized. But that's plain dumb. And it's sort of like it requires the fact that every bug report was actually a bug. And I had an issue back in the 90s where it, we were a small software company. So when customers had support issues, they would call into the main switchboard desk. Who am I kidding? We all just had a rotary phone number. There was no we couldn't afford a receptionist at the time. So either way, the support calls would come to a developer. And depending on what developer they got, what do we want to do? We want to write code. We want to please. So whatever the customer said they wanted, we did. And in this case, the wrong developer got the call and sort of said, yeah, it sounds fair. I'll change the code. It'll be out in the next release, without checking with anyone, without making sure that it was even a logical change. He just pleased that one customer and off we went. So there's a lot of stuff that we keep in our top drawer of features, which is called the Jira backlog or whatever you want to call it, that should not be done, and at least needs to be aligned with some strategy about where the product wants to head. And at the moment, that's a gap that I think a lot of companies struggle with, so much so that it created a whole new industry around portfolio management. We have a different group of people to try and come up with strategy and then try and work out what we're going to do to get there. So, given that we can develop anything faster, it now becomes more important to make sure that it really is strategically aligned. And then there's this whole chestnut that no one talks about called verification. I mean, just because the AI wrote code, did it do what we expected it to do? And did it actually do what the customers expected it would expect it to do? How do we verify what we're going to develop? Yeah, and the garbage in, the garbage outside of it. Now, the other part of it is a lot of work that we do, and we know this because we call them sort of dependencies, but there's some dependencies which are outside of code. So if you change a text string in English, but your code is translated, it should spark a whole set of work to retranslate all the help documentation, all the online documentation, all of the other languages that you have, making sure that I love Germans, but I don't like their language. It's 25% longer than English. So just by changing the English string, you could completely destroy the layout. Now, there's all of these hidden dependencies and follow-on work that happen inside real software products, which one AI coding agent may or may not understand to do. All right. How do I know this? Because I'm old and I've lived through and made every one of these mistakes over and over and over again. Right. And that's the difference, really, when we onboard new staff or new graduates in computer science and so forth. versus those of us who were actually sort of spent 2 a.m. fixing a problem we created out of the time, out of a rush of blood of taking a support call. So the other side of it is that, sometimes just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. Some of those items which are in our backlogs are low customer value, but really high risk changes. And that's sort of unassessed often, but that's exactly what senior seasoned developers actually can very quickly assess. They can sit there and sort of saying, "Oh, I know that area of code. We're not going anywhere near that area of code." All right. And nor do we have to. So because a lot of the things in our backlog are solving yesterday's problems, not tomorrow's problems. So for me, especially when I went headlong into sort of AI engineering, was being able to assess very quickly whether there was value in what I was doing, how ready it was, and how risky it was. And it's only through those sort of combination of balancing those factors that you could make a decision whether it should be done in the first place with AI or with sort of soft humans, right? So as the constraints change, it appears as if we've sort of just freed up the developer resource, but we haven't, and AI hasn't yet solved these other constraints that we have in product development. All right. So there we go. So I think we're in a new kind of delivery chaos. I think we get to do more code and more retries, but there's going to be more review churn, and there's going to be more regressions, and there's going to be more AI budgets spent on work that should never have been automated and done in the first place. And this is the key, I think. I think what I'm trying to do, if I'm, and it's inevitable, scaling AI engineering into software teams and product groups, is I think what we've got to do is sit down and think about these broader factors of things that can go wrong. And I don't think it's about sort of unlimited AI output. I think we need to help teams move at the speed they can verify what they're doing towards a clear strategic target so that we know that what we're doing is solving tomorrow's problems, not yesterday's. And sure, spending the AI effort on the work that we think is right. And now we've got to sort of define right. Now, I sort of thought about that problem. I mean, it's sad to think, but I'm really sort of known for a couple of hand-drawn sort of pencil sketches, which I have. Does that work? Yeah. This is one of them, which I always teach on what is performance inside an how do you measure performance of teams? And it seems easy, right? Well, faster, the throughput. We're going to measure throughput, or we're going to measure cycle time and watch the cycle time get shorter. But it's more complex than that. And we've known this in other industries for a long period of time. So what I tried to do was sit down, and this builds on some work of Larry Mascheroni in the early days there of what are the competing forces that mean an engineering team is operating at its highest performance. And we come up with these 6 dimensions: that they're doing the right stuff, that they're doing it right. There's a quality aspect to it, that they're doing it fast. In other words, they can pick something up and they can turn it around. If there's a prod outage, it can be fixed fast. That they can do lots of it, quantity. That there's some predictability. It doesn't mean that they get nothing done for 6 months and then they get everything done in the last month. That's sort of not not performance. That's just sort of sandbagging, and we have no guarantee that the team is doing well, and the ability that the team can keep doing it, or the system can keep doing it. And I view performance inside product development organizations as a tug of war between these 6 competing dimensions, because you cannot be excellent at all 6. Every time you try and improve one of them, you potentially impact and impair one of the others. And I've always viewed my job as sort of a coach in predictability and forecasting is helping companies not overdo any one of these in any one direction. And if we applied this lens to AI development, we probably know that we improve do lots and quantity, and we probably improve do it fast. But where do we trade? You know, it would be really easy just to do lots of stuff fast that have no customer value because the customer valuable stuff is more complex and the AI doesn't do a very good job of it. We know that, you know, garbage in, garbage out means that we could probably regress in quality, that by making a change in one spot to make an improvement, we could debilitate another area of the product and application, right? Consistency, we're going to have good months and bad months, bad weeks, because sometimes the changes we do are going to have a very high blast radius of regressions inside the application. So we're going to have to go back and do more. So it could look like we're getting lots done, but it's not valuable. And it's only a temporary improvement because we've got to go back and fix what we broke, right? So part of what we're trying to do with using AI in teams at scale is to not lose sight of where we're paying the price. All right. Yeah. Don't sort of, which ones of these would you like to emphasize if it was your pacemaker? Really, please work on quality. And so forth. So yeah, so there you go. So this is where I started. And what I ended up building was an AI generated system. Hey, you know, I need to get investment too, you know, so I had to put the word AI in it. But what I did was I decided to come up with this proxy score called readiness. It's ready to be done. This is ready to be handed off to AI, and business value. And when you put in ideas to it, what it does is it goes and assesses those ideas with this composite value. Sorry, you're all lovely, but your heads are in the way. I just shrunk you down. So speak loudly if you have a chat message. So what I looked at was I looked at, are the requirements clear? Is this a really complex change to the application? You know, this little security chestnut, does this have the chance of making private data publicly available? I mean, I know that's all the rage and all, but I don't want it to happen in my software. And the business value. And whenever I sort of create a new idea, so see, make Claude Code an agent skill here, I can run an assessment on it. And what it's going to do now is it's going to look at all of my descriptions and come back with those sort of 4 scores combined together and plotting it on this little matrix over here, solely for the fact of knowing that the system doesn't think that this is a very big business value feature. And, you know, this is just changing a component inside the application. And yeah, there really isn't a lot of business value in it. It's also not very risky, but it's saying that the one that is the customer value is the most. Let me just make this a little bit bigger there. Is that read-only analysis experience for new customers is probably a better thing to do. So, you know, that one we did making the Claude Code agent there, it, you know, it comes up as needs review. And, you know, the idea is it's not very complex. The requirements are pretty clear. There's no security, but it's not a very high sort of business value. But it summarizes it in its best words. And then what it does, and this isn't planning, but it asks me questions. Before you set this loose on AI, what information do I need to know to move it from, I don't know which one it is. Here we are. You know, what do I need to do to move that to the right to make it more ready to be handed off to an AI coding agent in planning mode to work out how to do it. So I'm trying to keep myself in customer product mode without worrying about implementation in these early days. What's the minimum success criteria of the version 1 skill? It should be able to produce a survey. So what it does is it comes back and it challenges me with, if you were to hand this off to an AI, what would it likely be? Well, this is sort of step one, is that whenever I create a new tool, a new feature idea or a new bug issue, is that I'm getting a cross-sectional view of all the factors that make it necessary, that I should be worried about. So I don't implement this feature before implementing this feature. That's what I'm trying to do here. This one's ready to go. And then when it's ready to go, what I can do is I can sort of go and copy it into the clipboard and and then what it does is it gives that whole history in the GitHub of all the comments that it did, including the pre-implementation questions and any of the answers I gave. And now I have a much better shot of the AI tool coding what I wanted. So that's what I'm trying to do. Before I hand work off to a team or into an AI coding agent, I look to make sure I have a way of assessing strategic fit, customer value, clarity and completeness, verification, strength, change risk, blast radius, and AI suitability. And only once that reaches a certain trigger point is it ready to be handed off and even considered as a feature that should be included in a future plan. And there's a lot of work on planning the implementation and the planning tools inside the AI agents, but it's what's missing from the AI agent's purview that matters. It doesn't really know the company strategy unless you particularly put in your agent's MD file. It doesn't understand sort of the rest of the application that it hasn't sort of coded yet unless it does a lot of review. So this is the first line of defense, is making sure what we want to do. So the other side of it down here is that green means it's ready to be handed off to automation. The oranges and the two shades of orange there are, this needs review. It's on the borderline. Maybe it's good for AI, maybe it's not. And red are things which are outside of the purview of the AI being able to generate alone. This is going to require a human in the loop, and it's going to require a lot of sort of research. So in this case, adding a Zoom add-in for real-time interviews, away you go. This is I got sick of paying for running surveys, so I AI coded a survey tool, and this is, if you go to askpilot.io, you will see this sort of tool. So what I've done is I've taken that balanced scorecard approach to coming up with whether something is ready for AI coding. It's not about how to code it. It's about what's going to be needed for AI agents to be successful in coding it. And it's trying to cover the gaps that by challenging you back with the questions that it needs in order to move its readiness from left to right. And, it stops you spending your resources on things which are low business value and not really well understood yet. This means we need to do more work to understand where this adds real business value, or leave it alone. So that's step one. But I had a bigger mission in mind, because what this assessment is what we expected these factors to be like. How would they, how complex is it? How well understood were the requirements? But once we've done it, that's when we know what is really been the friction, the trouble we really had getting it released. Because it's in those sort of review comments, oh, don't forget, you've got to fix the German layout strings. And don't forget that we've got to go and redo all of the documentation and stuff like that. The stuff that's outside of the code, that hits us. So we never really sort of deliver it very quickly. And what I also wanted to do there was learn from history about, for each change, and the summary and understanding of what that change and areas of code it touched. I wanted to capture the key metrics about how hard it was to actually deliver. Let me see if there's any down here which are, yeah. Yeah, so this one here, it took 2 commits, there was 10 files touched, there was 699 lines of code changed, and it didn't have any reviews because I'm lonely. And then it tells you why it gave it this risk score. And why is that important? It's important because when I create a new issue, I want to be able to find similar issues to understand and help augment that readiness value. So that readiness value starts off with a best guess from the AI engine with some prompts I've been sort of tuning over time. But as you do work, it learns from this type of work has this type of problem. So what we're really doing is capturing and creating a data set of what the keywords were of this particular issue description change and what it caused in these friction factors, are what I'm calling them. They're signals that if a number is higher here, it probably is a riskier change. So I tried to phrase all of these in a up. Larger numbers mean it's a more difficult change to make it land into the customer's hands. So once we have this data, we can create a machine learning model that sort of says, when I get a new issue, extract the keywords out of the new issue text, find anything in our prior data set that is similar to what these keywords are, and then assign a readiness score based on what we've learned from doing this in our context, in our world, in our history, in our applications. And this is exactly what a junior developer to a senior developer learns how to do intuitively. But as we're using AI and we're not typing the code anymore, we are going to very quickly atrophy the skills required to understand the risk of even simple changes into our applications. So what I'm trying to do here is help specifically in this code base and product set retain the knowledge of what was hard to deliver versus what was easy to deliver based on this data. Um, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's out there. If you're using Visual Studio Code, it's in the App Store. It's just called Issue Triage. Yeah, you can just sort of you can just go and install it, and it works on Cursor, and it's got a GitHub thing. So it's got a GitHub repo. If you do a search for Issue Triage on the store, you can see it all. It's all open source, so there's nothing here that I'm charging for. But yeah, if you do a search for Issue Triage, predictability at scale, you'll be able to sort of download it. Thank you, Mark. God, he's fast on the links, that Mark. But it was a tool I built for myself. And when I say me, of course I didn't code it. Of course, I just sort of said what I wanted. But what I'm trying to do there is, get us to is to build these data sets. And what I'm trying to do now is really refine the machine learning model, which means that when you create a new issue, it's going to very quickly assign a much more accurate readiness score based on what has really happened in the past for similar types of work, moving the memory along of code change risk and friction to new work. So once we have that, of course, we can throw that algorithm at a full backlog and be able to get a very good readiness score. And, you know, business value, if you could rate them at the end about this feature actually turned out to be a big winner and this feature didn't, we could machine learn that as well. But you can see where I were heading with it. So that was one. So step one was to assess the work, but first we do it heuristically using a good old LLM prompts and analysis. We work out whether we should route the change to a person or to the AI. We make sure we prepare it best we can to give us the best chance of success using the AI agents, and then we learn from the outcomes. We take these friction factors and we use them to analyze new proposed work to try and understand and predict, forecast whether it's likely to have a high number of pull requests, whether it's likely to have a high number of regressions, whether there's a lot of follow-on work. And that's the ability up front for our tools to learn and give us that information, which I think will make AI agents actually possible to use at scale in the future. If we don't have these, I don't think we can. So really what I'm really just doing is reinforcement learning based on our own real world experiences of having an issue go pear-shaped when we started it. So yeah, so Mark, that's where I wanted to stop. I wanted to more have a discussion around this now, to sort of see what sort of questions there are on. Well, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, it's but it's again, I've seen a lot of changes in the software world. I think that the AI coding certainly works. You just saw evidence of it. I haven't actually read or written a single line of that issue triage code by hand, but I certainly gave it a lot of my elderly experience as to what I thought was going to be needed to deliver it. And I think that's sort of what's missing a lot from the AI or engineering discussions at the moment is that they do an incredibly good job when they're told what to do. Just like, well, yeah, just like some employees and zero kids. But yeah, sort of like they've got to learn from experience too. And I'm finding that there's no feedback loops in the AI engineering tools. They're Yeah, they pride themselves on being one shot. You gave me an instruction and I did it. Wait a second, where's the learning? like like there were 16 follow-up prompts of me getting more frustrated and swearing at you. Did you remember that? And what sort of changes, what sort of prompts caused me to lose my SHIT because the AI coding engines went off on their on their merry way, right? So we've got to get some feedback loops back into AI coding at scale, especially on our code bases, before it will become successful, just like human developers. I mean, we did it poorly. We did these annual reviews, but the point was that sometimes you helped people cross the road in front of a bus rather than have them continuing to code your applications. Is that Yeah? All
So
right.
what I find fascinating about this is I was working with a client one time, and we were trying to get more aligned on building exactly what the customer within this bank was asking for. But whenever we try to sit down with the person we were writing the software for and say, okay, let's create some user stories that define how you see the world will be different. And they were like, okay, so as me, I want the software to do what what it needs to, so I will be happy. That's about the level that they would get to with stuff. Well, that wasn't extremely useful, but if you just give developers that and let them go off and run, it would be like giving the AI agents just like go create something, and they'll create something that's probabilistic
Yeah.
software rather than being aligned with what's needed. So I really like I like the way you're thinking through this. But I am curious, from your perspective, having worked with developers and then trying to do something similar with AI, was was AI, did AI feel like, how did that feel to you? Did it feel better because you were getting stuff really, really fast, or was it frustrating because it wasn't a real person? Like, just kind of the psychology behind it is mainly what I'm wondering for you.
For me, yeah. I mean, it's like I think 30% of the time it's fabulous. 30% of the time it's sort of, like it's doing what I asked, and 30% of the time I hate it, right? And to me, it was being able to upfront try and predict which 30% I was going to get from the prompt I was just about to give it. And
Okay.
but that's just like working with other people.
Yeah.
Except, with people you roughly knew which person to go to, and you had a bit of intuition up front about what that person was like. And now I'm finding like sometimes I'll use sort of Claude models for some things and OpenAI models for other things. Uh, and
Interesting.
and what's happening is AI is training us, and I don't think we're training the AI, right? AI, we're trying to make our prompts a little bit better to get a better result out of the AI. And that's because the feedback loops that AI was trained on was Stack Overflow questions and issues, right? But yeah, I think that yeah, it's not always right, and it was frustrating to me trying to understand well when it went wrong, why did it go so wrong? Why did it feel wrong?
Right.
And someone said in the thing there that 16 prompts is about the average. Yeah, and I what I try and do now is when I get myself into a death spiral of prompt dueling, I sort of think about okay, is it should I have refactored the code first to make this change really easy? Should I have what should have I have why is the AI struggling on this code is a good bit of feedback that the code it's trying to change is not changeable. Would it be more changeable by a human? Yeah, probably the human who originally wrote it, but not every other developer on your team. Sort of. So I think working with people, you had a better chance of knowing the exact person to go to get a positive result, but you could
Right.
have equally given it to the new employee and had a terrible result. And AI at least is consistently bad for a similar type of problem. Um, whereas us, it was whether we went out the night before drinking.
So, what other questions do people have for Troy, or questions, or comments, or discussion points? Under what people think. Check, skim through the chat, and see if anybody.
Yeah, I can't see the chat was.
See, Daniel is saying this is the closest thing he's seen to being the future of coding. And Kibra, come off mute. Let's hear what you got.
Yeah, I was just wondering what was the most difficult part of your four-part process when implementing this?
Well, the one I haven't done yet, right?
Yeah.
In all sorts of forecasting, you don't know upfront what factors are really the deciding factors in a good or bad outcome. Sort of. So you tend to pick a lot of things, and then you do a forecast of them, and then when you get an actual result, you sort of go back and sort of saying which ones of these inputs would have forecast that the best. So at the moment, I'm at this sort of shotgun approach of get everything I can out of the code base and the changes and the summarization and those factors. But there's a step in forecasting which is called sensitivity analysis, where you once you get the model forecasting something that you know come true and you think the model is fairly accurate, you can start changing all the inputs on the model one at a time by a fixed amount and then see which one changes the output the most. I'm at that stage now, I guess. I'm at least on my projects. But the reason I'm putting that there for open source is completely to try and get those data sets, right? Because the more people that use it and send me the data sets, the better the machine learning model about understanding Troy's guesses of friction factors about when things go pear-shaped. Half of them were meaningless and wasteful for collecting. I just don't know which half. It's so yeah, this is with forecasting it gets better when you can verify your forecasts, and it's a very difficult thing to verify at the moment.
Makes sense.
Verification is going to be the problem. In the software world, in the AI world, verification is the problem. While we just send a prompt and we grab the output and just sort of say to ourselves, yeah, that was a good output, that's not collected. If we don't collect that input, output, good or bad, then there's no way we can train our models in the future to be more gooderer and less badderer. So it's the loss of that, even human opinion, human judgment on that's a better response. So whenever you see a thumbs up and thumbs down on an AI prompt, it is really in your interest to give it a thumbs up and thumbs down. So one of the things I do when you close the issue in issue triage is it asks you, gut feel. Was this an easy change or was it a hard change? And that gut feel is probably going to be what we're trying to tune to, is to get inputs that match the gut feel, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Kira. Cliff had a question. He said, which AI model providers have you recently worked with for software development? And maybe what are you were talking about different personalities. I think Cliff wants to hear a little bit what your experience has been.
Yeah, I ended up getting, I'm on the $20 plan for Copilot, and I'm on the $20 plan for OpenAI Plus. Now, but with the Copilot one, it means I get sort of the Claude and the Opus and stuff like that. So what I tend to do is I ask one of them to come up with a plan, and then I ask the other one to assess that plan. And I think combining the two, at least, remember I sort of said I do that first upfront judgment of what's the business value of this and versus the readiness of it. I'm finding that, and it'll be this week, it's going to change next week, right? But I find the Claude Opus is very good at extrapolating the business consequences. And I find OpenAI being better at understanding the coding readiness. At least 5.3 codecs. But I've only had 5.4 for a couple of days. That followed my instructions far better than I've got out of any of the Opus or the prior OpenAI models, when I sort of said, please don't make this website page have a gradient purple shadow. It sort of did it, whereas sort of the other models would sort of it just sort of tell me your AI without telling me your AI, and that sort of stuff. So I think you got to duel them against each other, and I love doing it. That Opus, it says it's a pretty good model, and it says to do X. What do you think? And it's sort of it doesn't give the attitude. It says it's a good model, but my feeling is you shouldn't date a biker. And so yeah, it's just like listening to your parents. You got to work them against each other.
So Stephanie asked, have you considered leveraging this risk framework in other domains other than pure software development, specifically other types of AI where you don't have Visual Studio or coding tool? She says, I'm more on the ops side of DevOps these days, and I wonder about ways to incorporate the paradigm into ChatGPT, Copilot, etc., without 137 rounds of death by prompt.
And this is the key, right? I mean, we left waterfall behind, but we still, if we don't get the feedback from when you got a piece of software to operate in production, if we don't ever feed back what went wrong and why it went wrong, back up to the dev teams or into the skill files that we have inside our projects, if that never makes it back up there, then we're just going to get more of the worst. It's just going to continue to happen, right? So if you're in these separate worlds, the answer is, yeah, I think so. Like, I think I'd love to be able to avoid a lot more problems, even in the feature definition stage. when we're just ideating on what we could do, right? Every step you go down the chain past that, it's 10 times more impactful to improve and fix, right? So I think what we've got to try and do is take our knowledge from later in the processes and get it back into the decision process up front to avoid those problems ever occurring in the future again. So I think it's sort of, I think capturing the data about what happened in those areas and feeding it back to the machine learning model up front. So when someone suggested making a change in a certain area of the product, it already knew, here be dragons. Don't go, don't forget to do logging, and don't forget to put a prefix on your log so I can find it at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? That sort of stuff. So there's, I think it's that there's a lot of missing feedback loops that used to happen in person because we could go and belt the other person up, you know. We do it nicely. We say, "Can I get a lunch? And can I tell you my experience of operating your shitty software?" But at the end of the day, there was a conversation that happened about it, even if it was just, you're going to join the next 3 a.m. call, so to feel my pain. There was some feedback loop, and with AI generated code, there's at the moment there's a lack of that feedback. Have I said feedback enough?
Very
Yeah,
cool.
sorry. I mean agile. I got to use the word feedback 3 times an hour, or I'm not a consultant.
So Christopher asked, at the onset of this call, you talked about the organizational agility, small batch processing constraints, WIP, focus, etc. Are you perceiving in industry what I'm perceiving, a belief that the crowd who once nodded their heads affirmatively to all the agile stuff years ago are now saying, well, we don't need to be concerned with the agile values and principles any longer because AI can do stuff for us really fast? So it's almost as if they were saying, who cares about waste when AI can churn through it quickly?
It's such a myopic coding mindset, isn't it? Right? I mean, agile in the early days was not a. There was a starting period there where XP was sort of coding practice, sort of. It wasn't. In the early days, XP was about thinking more of the product as a system, and then it became coding practices, and then that sort of left the door open for Scrum and those other and Kanban to come in to try and take a step back and start looking at the system as a whole again. But to think that the AI coding step is significantly going to change the value of the product you build is just guaranteed to fail. And what Agile tried to do was sort of saying, leave us alone for at least a week or two. And in the early days, it was a month, so that I can show you something. And then when you see it, you're gonna be able to give better feedback on it rather than you can on this pen and paper that we're currently doing. And people always critique much faster than they can create. All right. So if you can show them something and get them to try it and test it, and they're sort of saying, close, but I'd like it changed this way. That's what Agile was all about in those early days. And I think that we're not sort of, anyone who's just sort of saying AI is going to get rid of coders has missed that point entirely. Is that coding? I think we're always spent more time talking and discussing what we're going to do than doing it. And I think AI still makes, all it's done is optimize the doing it step. Who's doing the thinking about it? Who's working out whether it's a valuable thing to do? I'm building a tool to try and put that back in. I shouldn't have to. It should be obvious. But yeah, the people who think that AI is just going to displace and revolutionize product development is on the wrong track. But like, I had a problem on Friday with another bit of software I have out there where I got a Slack message from a customer, and I sort of said, "Can you give me the reproduction case for this bug?" I cut and paste the Slack conversation into Copilot, and I sort of said, "Tell me why this might be happening," and it did that far faster than I ever would have by hand. So I can given the good input, I can turn something around much faster And given AI, I can probably code 3 possible ways of solving it rather than just having to pick one. But at the end of the day, it's about getting a human in the loop to sort of say whether that's a good idea or not. And we're skipping that step at our peril.
So, so this is my question. Do you see, so the current generation of people using AI, many of them, if not most of them, have experience actually doing software engineering, right? And so they're bringing that to this. If we think a couple generations down the road, you're going to have people that didn't have to necessarily go through the pain of looking things up on BBS or in books or wherever it
Mhm.
was, but their experience with software engineering will look very, very different. Um, how do you see just kind of what careers look like 20 years from now? How do you see that work? Like, how would somebody actually gain, a college student today, how would they actually gain enough experience to know whether this is the right thing or not? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, if I go back, I mean, yeah, even 2 years ago, what I if I was hiring a new team now, what would I be looking for would be very different than what I was looking for a year ago. And I think it was always the case, really, in software that it was maybe 50% coding skills, but there was always 50% sort of context about understanding the business problem and what you were trying to solve. And that, we nurtured that, right? I mean, we tried to retain staff longer because we recognized that there's a lot of accrued knowledge in that work. But I think the change is going to be that we become subject matter experts about what we're developing rather than how to develop what we're developing.
Okay.
So, you, you're going to pick a domain that you're in is now going to be your expertise. If you went into banking, your expertise and understanding of banking would be, if I had two otherwise equal coders, which one would I choose? I choose the one with more banking expertise than the one with least. So I don't think it's sort of changing, but I think now that ratio changes, that I don't care how you can manually code, because I do care whether you can look in event logs. I don't know
Uh-huh.
how long that's going to last, right? I mean, surely someone's
Yeah.
working on an AI to analyze event logs that you used to spend your. I had hair at one point in time, but as you're trying to link together sort of event logs. So I think what's going to become more in the career changes is that you're going to be expected to understand the domain you're working in.
Okay.
And I always try and break these problems down to, if I had two otherwise equal people, what would be the deciding factor between the two? And to me, it would be, experience in a domain. So pick a domain you like and work the hell out of it, and then find companies who are operating in that domain. Because even if you're a mediocre programmer now, if you understand a domain, you're probably going to go to the top of the list.
Spencer asks, what percentage do you think prompt code versus hands on keyboard manual coding? Do you feel the days of mostly manually writing code from the ground up is mostly gone?
Yes, I think, in the early days there, I started on assembler language because everything was sort of very particular, and there's still a few people who need to do those, like the people who write the C++ CUDA functions to do programming, that sort of stuff. That's probably, there's always going to be a need for these very niche hands-on coding areas, but I don't think that's going to be any applications that the general developers are going to work on. So I'm looking forward to the Y2K problem brought COBOL programs back into relevance, right? And I'm looking for the time where sort of 6502 assembly language coders are going to be useful again. And I don't think it's going to come. But the point is I think there's always going to be critical sections of the code. So even in my code that it's probably 90% AI generated, but the 10% I do because it is absolutely critical, time critical, cost critical, safety critical code. So yeah, I mean, someone said, "Oh, if you're working on medical devices, I think you're going to write it by hand. It's going to be tested by AI, and you're always going to use AI to review your handwritten code." And I think the majority of people are going to probably skip that first step in business applications, where it was never about the code, it was always about solving the business problem. And I people sort of say AI generated code is hard to maintain, but you will never maintain it by hand. It just has to be easy to maintain by another AI. And again, if you put good feedback loops in there about when things went wrong that AI previously generated, it's going to improve that code for you to avoid those problems. Maybe create a few new ones, but hopefully, on average, we equalize and acquiesce down to a standard.
So something you just said, I think, is very interesting. That the idea that you mentioned a similar, and no one's out there trying to maintain binary code or similar code by hand. We're writing stuff in much higher languages now, and I think what you just described was that same shift of you don't have to deal with Java or whatever anymore. You're describing a shift where you're not going to have to even think about that. You just have to make sure that the AI can deal with it and produce whatever it needs to, or maybe AI eventually just starts spitting out binary directly. Who knows? And then you probably aren't going to look at it. Christopher just had some. He had a comment. So he works at a company where they're very heavy on mob programming. And he said the mobber jobs have switched from mobbing on producing code to mobbing on reviewing the AI generated code. Yet the
Yeah.
core mob programming ethos still holds. No code goes to production without first going through the navigator's brains.
Yeah, it's probably good practice, and you're right. I mean, what do I think the career path for developers is? I think we're going to have to become very good at verifying code, verifying
Right.
results, and making sure that it really solves a customer problem. So I think that's what developers become. I think
Okay.
we become that sort of we fill the gaps of the knowledge that any AI could ever have. I think, and that's what we always did as developers. And the more
Mhm.
senior you got, the more niches of code you understood, or context problems you you knew. And I think so. If you're still mob programming, I think mob programming to do that sort of verification process is an absolutely good use of time, because what I would like to see coming out of that mob programming is any insights written down and fed back into the agent MD files, so that next time you didn't have the same mistake. So I think the mobs have to start sort of not just verbalizing it as a way of cross-training all the stuff, but I think they have to write it down so they can cross-train the AI generation.
I think we hit most of the questions here, and we're just like 2 minutes away from time. So, Troy, thank you so much for presenting on here. I threw the links for the tool you were showing. Is there anything else that any other links that we should leave people with that they might be interested in?
I just relaunched focusedobjective.com. If you could put that link in, that's got a whole heap of simulation tools and modeling tools in it, and they're all things that that let me just sort of see if I can just yeah. So if you want any of my forecasting tools and stuff like that, there's new online versions of them now, so that you
Oh,
can do
cool.
all the Monte Carlo forecasting, and down to even sort of doing full on sort of visual sort of simulations of things, to understand your that
Oh,
sensitivity
cool. Very
analysis and
cool.
stuff like that. So all this stuff is free. Um, and even sort of the team dashboard stuff, if you don't have any metrics on your teams at the moment, um, you can. And all you sort of need is a bit of completed data, start date, and a type. And then you can sort of get all of these sort of all these little charts. So anyway,
So
this is what's that?
so having these online, was that one of the things that you always wanted to do, and then with AI you were able to actually get it done?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. So what happens is, remember I said I use GitHub Copilot, and it
Uh-huh.
got to 3 hours before rolling over, and I only used sort of 60% of my allocation. I'm thinking, I'm going to use the other 40%. So I put it on Claude Opus, and I sort of said, here are my spreadsheets, make online versions of them. And what you just saw was 2 hours worth of work.
Wow.
And it took all of my prior spreadsheets and prior sort of code and just replicated it in 3 hours. And then it sort of I got up to 80% utilization, and then I sort of just sort of went hiking.
Didn't leave any of those tokens for to waste.
No, no,
Nice.
never waste a token.
There
A
was
token is something that has to be used. Anyway,
Well,
sorry
well,
about that.
I'd highly suggest looking at the focused objective stuff. I know that's very helpful to me over the years, and the online versions will probably make it even easier to access and stuff. So I'd highly suggest checking that out. That's like I said, that stuff always been great from Troy. But Troy, thank you so much for coming. This was great, very eye-opening. I saw a lot of great comments. People really giving a lot out of this. So thank you for making the time. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll have to follow back up with you maybe in a year and see what you've learned over the next 12 months. So, but thank you for
Hey, no
making time
problem.
to talk today. This was really, really great.
Thank you. See you, everyone.